This is what my Gypsy Wife Section 1 layout currently looks like. As you can see, there's a cat in the middle of it. So I'm going to remove the cat and try to assemble my Section 1. Okay, so now that I've removed the cat, this is what I'm looking at. I laid out all of the strips, so I cut all of the strips. So I cut all of the strips and I laid out my strips using the assembly diagram. So I have all of the strips laid out, and the next step is to start to piece all of those together. So the first piece I assembled was the square in a square with border block, and then there's these little pieces underneath. So I did that first. Then I attached the strip on the left of the square in a square with border block, and then attached that whole unit to the hourglass block. So on the right hand side there's one complete line from top to bottom of the section. And then the next little segment over has 6 strips on top that are longer and then 6 strips on the bottom that are shorter, and they go around the Puss in the Corner block. So these 6 strips include those special smaller strips, and then they just carry down to the bottom. So just from top to bottom of that section, that's how I'm going to assemble the strips to the Puss in the Corner to the bottom strips. The next section is just 2 strips together, the length of the section. Okay, and then here on the right hand side of the section is where it gets a little tricky. So this is what we're looking at. We've got the section of strips for the top that connect to the square in the square, that connect to this weird little section of strips on the bottom. So those 3 sections would get stitched together first, and then these 2 strips on the far right side would be attached. But what happens is with the pinwheel, when you try to connect the pinwheel, you can stitch this line here to these strips here, but then there's a funky little seam, and it ends up connecting in a weird way to this longer strip on the left hand side of the pinwheel. So here's my little trick. This is different from the pattern, but here's what I'm doing. So I have my longer strips, the square and square block, and then I cut this strip on the left hand side to match the length of the other 2 strips. So I've got a clean line to the square, to the clean line, and then attaching those to that section also gives me a clean line here. And then moving down to the, moving down to the pinwheel, I'm just attaching a segment of a strip on the left hand side of that, which would continue this left side strip, but I segmented it. I cut it into 2 separate pieces. Instead of trying to finagle that weird little corner seam or that Y seam, I made it easier for myself. Again, this is not part of the pattern. The pattern does say that should be one continuous strip, but I want it to be a clean seam between those 2 connections. So that's why I did this little modification. So what happens before I sew this, I'm going to show what's going on here. So I've got this section connected to the square and a square connected to this section, and then I will attach this strip all to the right hand side of those 3 segments, not to be confused with sections, and then The reason I attached this down here is because now I can just attach that pinwheel block directly across to the sections. Yes, hi Kat, thank you for your help. I appreciate your help. Yes, I'm trying to show this assembly and you're not helping. So that's why I kind of split that strip in half. Well, not technically in half, but that's why I split that strip into two pieces so that I could get that clean line across there. Now I have these 4 different segments of section 1, so I can just go 1, 2, 3 seams and finish the assembly for section 1. And here is the finished assembled section 1.